Maps are supposed to be simple. They get you from point A to point B. That is, unless you're talking about the maps that determine who is elected to the Wisconsin State Legislature. For more than a decade, Wisconsin has been accused of having the most gerrymandered legislative maps in the United States. That means the party in power drew the maps to create more districts made up of communities that traditionally vote for it, even if those communities are not connected to each other. Questions about the constitutionality of Wisconsin maps have been debated and litigated for years, including a case before the Supreme Court right now. But the outcome affects real lives and real communities here in Wisconsin. Joining us to get a better understanding of the state of Wisconsin's maps is Debra Cronmiller, Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. The League is a nonpartisan organization advocating for informed and active participation in government. Debra, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. What a pleasure.
Thank you. Help us understand how we got here. How did Wisconsin's maps get to be so gerrymandered?
Well, that's a big question. The simple short answer is when in the election of 2010, where both chambers of the House, the Assembly and the Senate, and the governor's office all were held by one party, the situation became ripe for manipulating the district maps to ensure that that kind of power could remain with the party. And indeed, that's what happened when we did the census in 2010. We had to make new maps to make sure they were proportional. But in addition to appropriating the right number of people to each district so they would comply with the census, some other shenanigans were done at that time that created a political gerrymander. And that's really was the start of it.
How do we know a gerrymandered map or district when we see it? Can you give us an example of how we know that it's a map that's just not quite right?
Well, sometimes they just don't look quite right, which is one indication. But unfortunately, visual tests of a map's rightness are not the only tests that should be applied. We have sophisticated software that can actually give us a number of different metrics about the maps. Not only are they politically advantaging one party over another, but whether or not they have other correct demographic embedded information. So are the districts equally weighted among the age groups? Are the districts equally weighted among the minority and white population? So there's many different things that have to go into consideration when drawing a map. And the one of the most significant, I think, is that we take into consideration not only all of the constitutional mandates for a map, but we have to take into consideration the federal legislation, the Voting Rights Act, and our own state statutes. And all of that has to come together in order for the maps to really pass muster.
And we have some maps that are so gerrymandered, they don't pass muster. Some of them almost look like Swiss cheese, with parts of communities taken out of them and given to other parts of other districts.
Yes, and I think what we've seen in the most recently drawn maps in 2021, 2022, where we started with not great maps to begin with, and then the map drawers in this cycle actually gerrymandered even further the maps, and that further gerrymander has created districts that are no longer as compact, no longer as contiguous, because they truly were trying to slice up communities to get the kind of voters in the district that they might be the incumbent in, or they're trying to preserve the incumbent seats, or trying to pack many voters of the minority party into one concentrated district, giving that minority party a complete reign in that district. But all of these tactics, unfortunately, result in less competitive races and really can be another way voters feel disenfranchised, that their vote doesn't matter because of how the district lines are drawn.
One of the things you mentioned is that it's the idea that communities are together in these maps. Why does it matter that communities are together in the map and that they're not split between 2 or 3 different districts?
There's lots of reasons that you want to keep a community of interest or a community of color together, because they share common interests and they should be able to use their vote to reinforce policies and laws that will represent those viewpoints. If, say, in the city of Milwaukee, you have a community where it's predominantly Black or predominantly Hispanic, their right, according to the VRA, is to be able to elect a candidate that represents their viewpoints, understands the community, sees the needs of the community, will take those needs to Madison and create legislation that would protect that community, embolden that community, and that's allowed, and that's what the law says should happen. If you take that compact community and cut it in half or cut it into 3, that voting block has been diluted now with the voting blocks of the communities around them that may not share those values. And that's the true problem with gerrymandering, is you're taking these communities of interest, diluting the viewpoint or the policy positions of those communities, and in doing so, you really have the opportunity for a government that is no longer a representative government. We send our elected officials to Madison to represent us. They should be speaking in our voice. But when you split up our voice, then they have opportunity to speak on behalf of someone else's voice. The voices of their high power money donors, the voices of the party, not the voices of their constituents. And that's the real crux of why the gerrymander is harmful to communities of interest.
Right now, there is a lawsuit, several lawsuits in front of the Supreme Court to really take a look at this issue, the Wisconsin Supreme Court. What can be done between now and 2024? It is, right in the rearview mirror, and it's catching up with us. Can we change these maps in enough time to make a difference?
Yes, the case in front of the Supreme Court now, the Clark case, it has been taken by the Supreme Court on original jurisdiction on 2 of the complaints that were brought by the law firm Law Forward. And those 2 complaints are on contiguity and on separation of powers. And we don't know how the court will rule, but what the court is deciding is, are the maps that were enacted actually constitutional? Do they meet all of the constitutional requirements in the Wisconsin Constitution? And the contention of plaintiffs is that because of the gerrymander, their voices are not being heard. And so, Law Forward will argue and has argued, as of the amicus who have come and joined in the complaint, that these maps are not constitutional. They are purposely depriving, one voter, one vote kind of situation happening in Wisconsin. I do think that this short-term solution for 2024 would be a court ruling that would say, yes, indeed, these maps are not constitutional. They need to be redrawn before we have another election. The longer-term solution to the problem isn't a solution that the court will bring. The longer-term solution needs to either be brought in our laws, so legislation would need to be passed that would ensure a nonpartisan, independent map drawing process, or better yet, an even longer-term solution would be a constitutional amendment where we, in addition to all the other criteria that are in the Wisconsin Constitution for what makes a constitutional map, we would add the nonpartisan mandate to that list.
Debra, it is a complex issue. Thank you so much for being with us to help explain it.
Thank you for having me.
For more information on the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, visit their website at lwvwi.org. Coming up, we'll talk to the interim director of the Milwaukee County Office of Equity and find out how that work is making our community stronger for everyone. We're back in a minute.